You're good.
All right, well, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. This is the Blacks in Technology Foundation Fireside Chat with Jeff Stovall, and I'm very excited to talk with you today. Blacks in Technology is a nonprofit organization that is based in the US and also internationally. We've been formally organized since about 2012, I believe, and we have at least 13 chapters across the globe. And our focus is really to provide resources to Black professionals interested in the technology industry, no matter what stage they are in their career, and also to provide training, resources, mentorship, talks like this one this afternoon, but it's really to uplift and to quote unquote stomp the divide to increase representation. So I'm so pleased to have Jeff today. My name is Natasha Walwyn-Robinson. I lead the Charlotte chapter, and I really wanted to focus this Black History Month 2021 on local leaders in Charlotte. I'm relatively new to the Charlotte area, and the first order of business for me was to meet all of the folks in the technology industry who are active in the community. And Jeff actually reached out to me, which was really exciting. And I learned quickly that we have a lot in common, which we'll get into a bit today. But starting off, we both, have roots in Cambridge. He chose MIT for his undergraduate career. I was raised in that Kendall Square neighborhood of Cambridge in MIT. So that was really exciting. We both are University of Virginia alum. Jeff studied there for graduate school. I was there for undergraduate, and now we're both in Charlotte and working in tech. I work for a tech company based out of San Francisco, and Jeff works for a small company you may have heard of, Oracle. So that was so yes. Without further ado, I'd love to launch into the few questions I prepared. And as Dennis, our executive director, who's being very modest, but he is our leader of Blacks in Technology across the globe. He's great. He will help facilitate any questions the audience may have. So feel free to, as he said, put it in the chat. I see there's some activity already. Hi, Jarrett. Yep, and Jasmine as well. Looks like we have some Charlotte folks. So I'd love to just pause very quickly and say, Jeff, how are you this afternoon? And how did you get into technology? Maybe we can start there.
Certainly. Well, I'm doing well. Today is a holiday for Oracle, so I've had some extra time for myself this morning. But yeah, to answer your question, how did I get involved with technology? Actually, my interest in technology started very early. You could say it started at my father's knee. My father was a electronics technician for Kodak for many, many years. So as I was growing up, I was constantly exposed to electronics and technology, and I kind of picked it up early on and made a decision fairly early in I would say somewhere between middle school and the first couple years of high school that I really wanted to be an engineer. And so that's kind of sent me down a specific direction in terms of the type of education I was looking for, where I thought it would go. I did very well in high school, so I had a number of opportunities to go to different universities. MIT was at the top of my list because I was interested in robotics. And at the time, this was in the late 80s, the MIT had one of the best robotics programs and still has one of the best robotics programs in the world. So I'd really inured myself to really going and dedicating my career to technology. Ended up going into undergrad as a mechanical engineer versus going in as an electrical engineer. And that's how I started my first few years out of undergrad, was as a mechanical engineer working for DuPont. So I worked for DuPont for about 7 years. 6 years before going back to graduate school and deciding that I was going to take a different direction with my career. So that's how I got exposed and started with technology. Now, my entry into IT was a little bit more delayed. So you would ask, how does a mechanical engineer end up in IT? In my graduate program, at UVA, I was really focused more on product marketing and it's a general management school, but product marketing was what I was interested in. And I was interested also in what was happening in the telecom field. So when I graduated, I ended up going to Sprint, which is based in Kansas City, Missouri, and did a number of different things while I was at Sprint. I was in their executive development program. So I was in marketing, I was in product, I was in a transformation office. Around my third rotation with inside of the program, I landed in a group that needed an interim IT director. And the IT director in this case was what they call client side IT. So they split client side and service side IT. I was the interim client side IT director. And so I had a portfolio of IT applications that I maintained for that particular client within inside the company. I would work with the IT organization in order to fulfill changes and enhancements to that portfolio. And that was really my first IT role. I'd always had an interest in computers, and maybe even had considered going to computer science, but MIT is notorious in terms of how it discourages all of their undergraduates from going there, because something like 80% of the students who come there want to go into electrical engineering and IT, so they have to spread us around, So I ended up going into mechanical engineering, but never really lost that interest. And with that being my first role, and I participated in a reorganization of our IT that really combined IT across multiple departments we had three separate divisions of the company. We wanted to have a consolidated IT. So I was part of the group that worked on the consolidated IT for all three of the divisions. So it was a really kind of a verticalization, or making horizontal out of what was vertical organizations. So that's how I ended up in my first IT role. And from after that, I subsequently went into an IT merger integration role, where companies were being acquired. The IT side of the organization basically recruited me to come over because they wanted somebody who was more familiar with the business side rather than just the technology side. And so I think in that, what's important to kind of take away, and that's a bit of a long story, obviously, but what's important to take away is that even though you can develop technical skills in an IT career, there's going to be a pivot point at which any organization will want to see business skills and leadership skills, as well as the technical skills. And that becomes an important pivot point as you're looking to grow your career, particularly if you're thinking about staying in IT for a long time. And for me, that was a pivot point in which I went from really having a functional technology leadership to a broader leadership across the organization.
No, that's so excellent. I'm just thinking about all of the themes that came up and just the richness of the experiences you shared. So what I heard, if I can just repeat back to you, was a willingness to be open-minded and, like you said, pivot, right? Because sometimes you can find yourself in your career like, okay, I think this is what I want to do, and maybe even close yourself off to certain opportunities. But it sounds like you did the opposite, where you were open to seeing where it would go. And as you took on more responsibility, you delved deeper into both the business and the technical. And I think that's really key. And for people who may be younger trying to figure out their careers, that it isn't a linear progression all the time. Sometimes it's good to experiment and see and stretch yourself into new areas and see where it can go. And so, like, as you were going through your career journey, and even now, like, who are some of the people who maybe came into your life or really inspires you, whether it's family or otherwise? And could you talk through some of that with us today?
Yeah. I would say that I am very much a product of the idea of it takes a village to raise someone up. I've already mentioned my father, but also my mother was a real strong influence on me. I'm an only child, so I don't have siblings, but my mother was a very strong influence in that. She was a teacher, had gone back to school while I was still in middle school to get her master's degree. And she really instilled in me the value of education, and the value of really trying to continue to push and grow as an individual in terms of your technical skills, your capabilities. That was obviously that was something that was very important to me. I thought about this a little bit, and I think about all the individuals that may not necessarily have had leading parts, in terms of trying to as a mentor type of person, but really supported me. I think about my high school math teacher, and she taught me trigonometry and calculus while I was in high school. And she was constantly a person to really push and really support and say, you can do this, but it's not going to be easy, right? You still can do it. But it's not going to be easy. And I contrast that with an earlier teacher that I had who had told me I couldn't go to MIT. I wouldn't make it. I would not be able to make it through because he felt like he couldn't do that. He ended up at a state school. He had applied to MIT, didn't get in, and had some sour grapes as an adult, and was projecting that on me as a high school student. So you think about the juxtaposition of these two teachers in the same school. I had both of them, and yet one had that lasting influence that was positive, and one was actually a motivating influence to say, yeah, I can overcome what you were saying that you haven't been able to do, or that you don't think I would be able to do. I think about one of my first managers that I had, who really convinced me and taught me that that if I wanted to go into management, that I would need more training in management. And that was actually a pivot point that encouraged me to go back and get my master's degree. I was interested in getting a master's degree, but I pivoted from a science or engineering based master's degree into an MBA, because I really was interested in going up the management track, not just the technical track in mechanical engineering in DuPont. I think about the cumulative effects of all those individual people who gave me guidance, gave me support along the way. And I've been truly blessed in having a life where I've been around people who believed in me. And I think that's important for anybody who's trying to do something that might be the first in their family, might be the first person that they've ever known to do that. And you don't necessarily have a lot of role models that are right there that you can say, I want to be like that person, because that person's just not there, career wise. And so I think it's always important to take inspiration from your community of people, rather than just always thinking it has to be one person that kind of carries you at every given point.
That is so true. And it's unfortunate. I have a story like that too, where I attended a prep school, and the guidance counselor, whose job is supposed to be to encourage me to pursue higher education, was discouraging me from applying to UVA. She felt that it was a selective school and I should go to where my parents had gone because it would be easier for me to get in as a legacy. And I had great grades, and I couldn't understand why she just was not excited like I was for this opportunity, but I didn't listen. And it's that I'm glad that I had the confidence to not listen to her and still pursue what I wanted to do. But that story comes up a lot, for a lot of people who looked like us, quite frankly. And I'm glad that that you also too found the courage to listen to the positive people in your village and keep going with what you felt you knew you wanted to achieve. Because for some people that may be what they do listen to, and there may be a different story. The other thing that's so interesting is my mom is also an educator, and she also went back to school around the same time your mom did. And I remember her making that decision to get her master's, and that was very influential for me, that she thought it was very important for her to pursue her education, higher education, and stuck with me as something that I would always do, is always be a learner, right? No matter what
Right.
stage I'm in. So it's again another interesting commonality. When you said that, I was like, oh, that's funny, because my mom had a similar.
Yeah,
Um,
my mother still sets an example for me. She went
yeah.
back and got two more master's
Oh,
degrees after that. So, I still continue to be inspired by her
yeah.
determination to continue to live in a way that really maximizes her capabilities. And I think all of us need to look for those types of role models that are about grit
Hmm.
and about perseverance, not just about career placement and being where you are on the ladder,
Yeah.
because those things can be ephemeral in a lot of ways. Your position in a career ladder is not guaranteed. No
Hmm.
matter how hard you work, it's still not guaranteed. And so building that resilience that you need in order to get over the times that are difficult is extremely important, in order to continue to advance in any career.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And I think the mindset that I think we're all kind of forced to adopt now in a pandemic, to have those skills kind of honed a little bit over the years may help a little bit to get through
Absolutely.
what is a challenging time, no doubt. But yeah, so could you tell me, looking at, all of the amazing things you've done, I mean, the amount of awards, when I read your bio, I was like, goodness gracious, like it was so inspiring for me. What role would you say was the most important to you and for what reason? Could you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, I would definitely say that the role that I had as the CIO for the city of Charlotte was the most important for me personally, um, as a growth opportunity as well. But for a whole lot of reasons, some of which may not be entirely apparent. I mean, obviously there's a title associated with that, and people can recognize that and see that. But for me, that role was important for a number of reasons. One, I was the first CIO for the city of Charlotte, and we had IT directors in divisions before, but we had never had a CIO who had administrative authority over the entire city. And so that was a mile setting role. It was an opportunity to really have a big impact and a big influence inside the organization. Two, it was my first time being in the public sector. And a lot of people who've never been in the public sector have perceptions about people and careers in the public sector that are really shaped by things that they've heard about, but not necessarily experienced. And I wasn't necessarily thinking that my career path would go through the public sector, but I was there for 10 years. And the thing that was for me important about that role was also the ability to really be in an organization with a sense of mission. And that's one of the things that anybody who's been in the public sector, anybody who has been maybe in the armed services understands that immediately, that, these organizations are built with a sense of mission beyond profit. And, for me, that was something that was resonant in terms of things that I was, my value system, and it led me to want to stay in that role for 10 years. Um, and lastly, I'd say that the reason why the role was important was because it gave me a breadth of opportunity to be able to help other people in my role. Um, Oftentimes in the private sector, the range of people that we're able to help is relatively narrow. And even if you're with a large company like an Oracle, the number of people that you can directly touch or directly have an influence on can be very limited. And being in the public sector, it was always really clear what impact I was having on my community. It was always very clear what, if I made this decision, what that would mean for the city as a whole. And that direct connectivity between action and impact, which is sometimes hard to establish when you're in a large organization, particularly, or even a small organization in the private sector. It can be hard to make that connectivity. I always had that sense of connectivity in the public sector.
I forgot that too. Oracle, we had that that in common too. As
That's right.
a, as a young attorney, I worked in their contracts team, and then I decided I wanted to travel, so I joined their license management services team as a consultant. And I didn't have the nicest job. I was auditing and dealing with CIOs and looking
Yeah,
at
that's an unpopular
results.
job. That's an unpopular.
But it gave me a great, understanding and appreciation for the business, and was really where I got my start in the tech industry. But it was so true when you were talking about the ability to drive impact. And my impact was more negative, if anything. But in terms of, like you're saying, reaching the public and the consumers and everyday people, I appreciate that about your comments about the public sector. And I haven't had an opportunity to work directly in the public sector, but I am curious about it. We'll see where it goes. I
Mhm.
worked for a large contractor for a period of time too. But I got an appreciation for the federal acquisition regulations, and they're very dense. If anybody has the misfortune of reading those.
It's a
Uh,
specialty unto itself.
yeah,
Yes.
okay, yeah. So I kind of got dissuaded there, but who knows? I didn't look at it from that perspective. That your reach, like you're saying, you're serving the community with what you're doing, even if you are in a information systems or technology role. The impact is still ultimately, on the community that you're working in. So, and this isn't a prepared question, but I am very curious about the work that went into preparing for the DNC. That must have been very intense.
Yeah.
Could you could you give us a feel for, maybe not the nitty gritty of it, but just maybe what your memory is of that time and
Certainly.
orchestrating that or anything like that?
Yeah, anytime you're dealing with a national security event of any kind, where you're going to be dealing with a lot of three-letter agencies, FBI, NSA, and whenever you're dealing with one of those, it's very intense because there's a lot of scrutiny on the organization. There's a lot of concern about something, what can go wrong. There's a lot more concern about what could go wrong than there is about what could go right in a lot of ways. And so, when you're working on that type of event, it's really very important that everybody in the organization gets it and that they're working in the same direction. And they're not working towards processes or uh, cross goals. And it's easier to say that than it is to make it work, because any organization that I've ever been in, there've always been conflicting goals, right? This division has this goal, this manager has this goal, and they're superficially in alignment, but when you get down to the nitty gritty, you find that people aren't really aligned about what it is that needs to be done. And so establishing that alignment up front, internal to the organization, it was key. And I think that was probably some of the biggest challenge that I had with that role, was first making sure that everybody was on the same page and making sure that we all were going for the same objective. And up until that point, our organization didn't have a centralized PMO. We didn't have a single PMO for the organization. I created a PMO for that event. And that was the impetus that we said we always wanted one. We never really did it. And then the event came and then we had to have one. And so I leveraged that event to create the PMO for the organization, and had a great leader that was in our organization already, who was already in place and was really capable to be able to lead the PMO. And then spent most of my time beyond that trying to drive alignment across these other divisions. Both then it becomes more of an external facing as well as internal. Now that you got some internal cohesion and people are moving in the same direction, you have to work with all the external agencies and make sure you're also on the same page there. So once I have PMO established, had a great leader in place that she was leading that, then was able to kind of pivot to the outside activities and make sure that we were on the same page with all the other agencies, both local as well as federal. So I think the biggest challenge associated with that, it's a leadership challenge. It's not about the technology. We had, I think it was about 200 projects that had to be done. So there was operational activities that had to be done and had to fall in line. And those things, they did get done. But the leadership aspect of making sure that people are aligned, we all know what our mission is, we know what our priorities are, we have the same set of operating parameters that we're working on, the same set of assumptions that we're working on, those things require constant cultivation. And I think it was an object lesson to me in terms of how to make a complex event or a complex initiative happen, in that you really did have to cultivate all those things simultaneously and deliver on time, because time was a huge factor. We didn't have extra time. We had to use all the time that we had right up to a deadline. And after that, there was nothing else you could do.
Wow, that one gave me a real sense. Wow, that a lot to that there. Awesome. But I'm sure that experience probably, informed a lot of, your things that you did after that, like achieving something like that, and succeeding with that probably, encouraged you more as you took on more complex things, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I read that, I was like, I could only imagine what that entailed. So thank you for sharing. And then as far as like, I like to play this game of, if you could predict the future, let's say, or, 5, 10 years from now, where do you think, the future of technology is headed? I mean, we're seeing wearables, we're seeing, the whole AR, VR stuff, artificial intelligence is part of the conversation nowadays. Self-driving cars, where do you see the future of technology?
Yeah, I think, and I've written about this actually in my LinkedIn blog. I think the issue that we're going to be facing with technology over the next few years is not really about technology, it's about society. And so the impact that technology has on society, but people are still people, and we still do people things like we have for thousands and thousands of years. We just have different tools. And so what I see over the next few years really is this idea of how do we promote society in the way that we feel is constructive collectively with these tools that are on the face of them. They don't have any moral intent built into the tools. So that means that they can be used for great harm or for great good. The tools are, neutral in that respect, but they're very powerful. It's the societal equivalent of almost like nuclear arms, right? Instead of, everybody running around with pistols, now everybody's got these nuclear arms. You can trigger millions, if not billions of people very quickly, without much of anything to intervene. And I think we've seen, particularly in the past few months, what the power of our technology tools means in terms of who has a voice, how that voice is given, how that voice is actuated in our society, and to what extent can those same tools be used to mitigate those things? Because those forces are not new. Those are forces that have always existed in humanity, but we have such a huge amplification in terms of the technologies that are available that it makes it a much more dangerous time for our society than it would be otherwise. Not to say that we haven't faced present dangers in the past, but the range of tools that exist for amplification just is extraordinary. And so I see one of the big threads of technology is not really about the technology, but it's about how do you place guardrails on technologies that are constantly evolving. They're evolving faster than any type of regulation that you can impose. So what are the things that you fall back to if regulation is not going to be a way to be able to control how these tools get used in society? What are our other mechanisms? And those are societal issues. They're not truly technology issues because the technology, as I've said, is neutral. The other aspect of technology, I think this is really important, is clearly in the medical field, and clearly what we've seen. It's extraordinary what we've seen with how fast the vaccines were developed. I mean, they really developed the first shot at these vaccines only a couple of months after they were first introduced, which is, unparalleled in human history. But with that being said, how do we choose to use that capability going forward? We've demonstrated what we could do around coronavirus, but coronavirus obviously isn't the only ailment that we have as humans. So where do we prioritize what use of our medical technology gets made and what doesn't? And that's another huge impact, I think, bigger than what we've seen in the past, that will have massive ramifications for who lives and who dies in this world going forward. And so I think we have to really be concerned at this stage about the ethics of our technology versus the capabilities of our technology. When the capabilities are exceeding in some cases, what we've ever had to deal with from an ethical dilemma before.
Wow, that's the first time I've heard that perspective. And it's a lot to think about. You give me a lot to think about there. So many levels. I don't even have anything to respond with other than that. And I usually have
Well,
some.
that could be a whole discussion unto itself. What are the
Yeah.
ethical implications? I participated in a panel about 2 years ago at Harvard University that was really focused, not a panel, but it was a session focused at AI and how AI was impacting our society, and what were the ethical and operational considerations that needed to be thought about with AI. It was a great session. It was put on by Bank of America. And we left the session with more questions than we had answers. And I think that's the thing that we'll find here. After the space race, there was a lot of emphasis on STEM, right? People there were a lot of engineers we needed to produce, a lot of scientists we needed to have in order to be in the space race. But subsequent to the space race, the questions of the ethics of what we created after World War II, after the space race, what are the ethics associated? And I think we're seeing something very similar, where our technology has zoomed ahead, but ethically, we're still trying to catch up. We're still trying to catch up as a society. And those are the things that have the biggest impacts in society, because they can have such rapid and widespread impacts.
Definitely, yes. And even as an attorney in this space, a lot of the questions around data protection and the use of personal information, and how much data can our software or technology collect, and Jarrett asked that question about and I will jump in and pose it to you because we're on the topic, but where do you think perhaps the line should be drawn in terms of the amount of data that is collected? It's a tough question.
Yeah. And it's a tough question I'm going to dodge. And the reason why I'm going to dodge the question is because it's not about the data. Data collection in and of itself is, again, like technology, neutral. The question really is, what are we trying to defend ourselves against with data accumulation? What we're trying to defend ourselves against is our worst angels, not our better angels, our worst angels. And we're also trying to defend ourselves against things that are unanticipated consequences, things that we think we're working on for the good of everybody, but we find that there's a downside that we didn't anticipate. And I think those are the things that pose the biggest challenges for every leader in technology, because every leader now has to think about the ethical considerations of what they're doing, not just the operational and practical considerations of what we're doing. So when we're talking about the limits of data collection, I don't think that there are any inherent limits in the data collection itself. What we need to be concerned about is how people will use that data once it's been collected, once it's been pulled together, once it's been analyzed, once it's been pulled apart. Those are the things that we worry about. We worry about our other humans more than we worry about the computers that are collecting on the humans' behalf. And that's what I think, for me, being in a leadership role in technology is really all about. It's not about the technology itself. I get excited about technology, like many of us will, but the real nitty-gritty, the real difficult challenges, the real things that impact us all generally come from human behavior. And so not only do we have to be students of the technology, but we also have to be students of human behavior as well in our history.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that position. It's true. I mean, the law has accounted for the fact that, that there can be misuse or mishandling, right, of that data when it's collected. And a lot of the laws that are in place do focus on making sure that there is legitimacy, or you have to show as the collector why you're using it and for what purpose. And if it is for like a marketing or a commercial purpose, that you give, the option to opt out and all that good stuff. But yeah, in terms of, when you look at the technology with facial recognition, and we know the studies that have come out where there is some bias built into what, like when it comes to even Black people, when some of that technology and how that negatively impacts, and there's bias towards Black people, or for some of the voice activated technologies, where if someone's accent is different, or it's not in line with the one of the person who is actually in the technology, how that can potentially create some discriminatory impact on the user, or create a barrier to access, or adoption of certain technologies, because it's just not relatable.
Right.
So, but that is, again, there is that human connection, right? It's not the technology itself doing it, it's the people who are working on it and consuming it and all of that. So I think that is a very true point to make that distinction.
Yeah, and I think that exists in all the technologies that we talk about, because every one of the technological challenges that we're talking about can be overcome because we already have overcome them, right? Facial recognition as a technology, being on the shelf, easily accessible technology, was not available 15 years ago. I mean, 15 years ago, you would have to be in some sort of either government or corporate laboratory to have access to that type of capability. Now you can get it on your smartphone. And so, I think those things, in terms of how rapid the technology is evolving, is almost a given. You can't really, the genie's out of the bottle. It's very, very difficult to pull that back. The question then becomes, how do we comport ourselves as people in that environment? What are the things that are legitimate? What are the things that are illegitimate? Why do we decide that they're legitimate or illegitimate? Even to the point of facial recognition, is it possible to build facial recognition systems that are neutral to race? Yeah, that's not impossible. I mean, we could do that, but do we? And if we don't, why not? Those
Right.
are the questions that we have
Yeah.
to ask ourselves, is why do we have these biases that are built in? Because the people who are building them are, in some cases, even blind to their own biases.
Right. Right.
And so those are the things that we struggle with. And I think that's the most important part of where we're going with our technology, is, whether it's in Charlotte, as the nation as a whole, is how do we come to the rules about making those decisions, and how quickly can those rules evolve given a rapidly changing technology? The rules can't be but so narrow, or else they're going to be obsolete the next year. So rules have to be bigger, and they have to be based on principles that we can all agree on.
Definitely. Great. Yeah. And hard turn to the next topic, but I've been asking people, to try to, mentally escape what's going on. If you could think about a place
Yeah.
that you love to travel to, or you have in the past, as soon as we're in the clear to go there, where would that be, and why?
I have a very distinct sense about this one. And so the answer to the question is Alaska. And there's a reason behind that. Last year, I had a milestone birthday. My mother was also having a milestone birthday. And so we both were at this point, and we were thinking about how do we want to spend our time. And we had agreed that we were going to go on a family cruise to Alaska. If you recall, around June of last year, nobody really wanted to be on a cruise ship with a bunch of people you don't know. And so that whole trip got indefinitely put onto the shelf. The money that you saved got put to some other use, because we didn't know when we were going to be able to go. I just read an article saying that the 2021 cruise industry could get really busted this year as well, because people are just not going to be able to come back. And so yeah, it would be Alaska, and it would be on a cruise, because I have a deferred obligation now to be with my mom and our family on a cruise after vaccinations, and after we've made sure that those vaccinations work for most of the variants.
Cool. Yeah. I've never been to Alaska. Yeah, that I've heard great things it's a shame. Yeah. And someone said that they don't find them, they don't think they'll be going anywhere. I mean,
Yeah,
Chris
I
said he
see that Callie says, I know Callie. So, so yeah,
don't
yeah,
blame you, Kelly. Yes,
yes.
great. Yeah. Okay, and then my final question before we answer or talk more about the audience questions is,
Sure.
you know, what would be some parting words you have for folks or advice or things you want people to take away from our time together today?
I think the thing that I would particularly say for African Americans and Blacks who are in technology, who really are looking at how do they make this work for them, right? How do you make this technology career really work for you? And I would say that the rules about what works and what doesn't have really changed in the past decade, maybe a little bit more. It's been about 20 years since I graduated from graduate school. And at the time, there was a big dot-com bust happening. Um, and and a lot of people had a lot of concerns about, these dot-com companies, would they ever come back? Of course they did. I mean, now we have Amazon that grew out of that. We have, Google that grew out of that. We have a number of companies and, companies like Apple that sustained through that and really powered through, become, extraordinarily valuable companies. But when we start thinking about how do we make this technology thing work for us, the thing that we often give short shrift to is owning our own businesses. Owning our own businesses. And I really am a proponent of people early in their careers trying to figure out how to build wealth through ownership of their own business. I mean, we've always said, we have said for the past, 70 years that home ownership was the principal way that people build wealth in the United States. And that's largely true. But people who have particular talent have other options available to them to build wealth beyond that, that can well supersede what you can do just through home ownership directly. And I do think the notion of building businesses should be at the top of any person's career path objectives when you're starting out these days. And I'm gonna say, a young person, somebody who's maybe under 40. If you're over 40, it's not closed off to you, obviously, but the risks start to become different. And but yeah, I would definitely say that this is an important thing. It's not something to minimize. It's not something to say that it's impossible. Obviously, it's not impossible. It's not easy. And I remember one of the professors that I had when I was in business school, I took an entrepreneurship course. And he started off the course by basically saying, entrepreneurship is one of the few ways that people have to actually build wealth. And he says, well, you can marry into wealth, you can be born into wealth, or you can work for it and you can build it yourself. And oftentimes those other two options are, for one reason or another, cut off for people. And so if you're thinking about that building of wealth, he also went on to further say that, if you, given the talents of the people in this room, if you give it 3 tries, you're almost guaranteed to succeed. You're never guaranteed to succeed on the first try. Most people don't. But if you're willing to stick through it and you're willing to give it 3 tries, you're almost guaranteed to succeed by the 3rd try. And that piece of advice did stick with me in terms of, how I think about, how I even talk to my own children about their careers and their progress and what, and the aspirations that I might have for them. Because in order to get those 3 tries, you can't start when you're 60. That's not going to be the right time to start. You got to give yourself, the reason why the 3 tries is important, because you do have to give yourself time to recover if things don't work out the first time or the second time. And it takes time to recover. And so I think specifically, and I had another friend of mine, some of you may know him, Martin Davis. He was the CIO of Wachovia, and then he was with Wells Fargo. Now he's with Southern Corporation. And another big proponent of entrepreneurism, has helped other members of his family become entrepreneurs and build businesses. And he said, if I were starting out today, I wouldn't even go the corporate route. I would go the business route. owning my own business route, the entrepreneurial route, because the opportunities there are so much greater than they were when I was coming through. And you have that sense of being able to steer your own ship. So I know I'm beating this horse a bit much, but I think it's truly important for everybody who's of that capacity and capability, that potentially that you could do it, that you give it strong consideration, because it is the predominant way that people can really build true wealth in this country. That's generational wealth that impacts you and the generations that come after.
I love that. Yeah, it's definitely something that even I, juggle with. I've worked, for companies my whole career, and I never really practiced, for myself or had my own practice. So it's something I kind of like, maybe at one point we'll see. But also the point of legacy too. I have two young girls, and I want them to see that, truly anything is possible, whatever they put their mind to, and they work hard at. And yeah, not everybody's cut out for the traditional 9 to 5, so to speak,
Absolutely.
and there's something to be said about, getting up every day to do something for yourself, for your family. So I think that's a great message. And right now, while things may be, challenging, we may see a big, boom of innovation and creativity as a result of these times, because people are essentially forced to be at home, or to do a lot of thinking, right, and reflecting. So I'm excited
Absolutely.
to see what comes out of it, in all facets, whether on the tech side or entrepreneurial side, the arts, whatever it may be. I'm hoping that it'll be a positive. Down a couple years from now, we'll say, oh wow, a lot of good came out of this time. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing that we should always recognize, is that, even when things are bad in general, opportunities are always created. And I reflect back on that whole scenario I was telling you about, when I was coming out rather, of my graduate program. And, these .com companies with huge valuations were just crashing. I mean, you're seeing valuation losses like 99%. I mean, huge crashes, incomplete burns. And then same thing started to happen in the telecom industry. Um, but what came out of that were other successful companies.
right, yeah,
They learned from those that
yeah.
crashed and burned, took those
Mhm.
business models and transformed them into something that was more sustainable. And I think absolutely that will happen with what we're seeing here with this pandemic. We've learned how to use technologies in new ways. I can say 3 years ago, I would not have been doing a Zoom call. I mean, because nobody was really interested in the video aspect. I mean, it's
So
like
true.
in the workplace. I mean, it's not
Oh
like
yeah,
these are new technologies, right? These have
right.
been around for a long
Yeah,
time.
yeah. But
And
there's an art to it. Yeah, there's an art to it. And
there is.
yeah, you adjust. Like you said, you adjust and you learn it. And it's a skill that'll help,
Mhm.
And
And
I've
it
met
creates
people
opportunity.
all over the world, that I wouldn't meet. I wouldn't meet someone from Romania on a, a typical year, but with all the virtual stuff going on, that has again been a real positive in terms of connecting with people and getting out there. Even if I do have to put on makeup, but it is. So I have two questions that are in the chat. We have a few more minutes left, or it looks like one question really, but some anonymous person asked, do you have any ideas on how to educate the workforce and how to learn about technology to have able-bodied individuals in the economy? I'm not really entirely sure what they mean by able-bodied, but maybe just equipping or this yeah, equipping people with the right tools to get involved in technology. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think whenever it comes to getting people to use technologies and getting them equipped to technologies, again, and you'll hear this as a refrain from me, the first thing you're dealing with is human nature. And so, particularly IT leaders, and we're very familiar with this problem. We even have a name for it: change management, right? We talk about change management. We talk about IT change management. We also talk about human change management, and organizational change management, and how that is not just at the organizational level, but that is that is at the individual level as well. And so, what I think about in terms of how do we equip people with the right capabilities and the right technologies, first we have to meet them where they are. understand what are their perspectives, what are their inhibitors, what are the things that would cause them to embrace or reject these technologies. I have got an 87-year-old grandmother that I talk to on a cell phone now. 5 years ago, she didn't want a cell phone, and then she realized, oh, well, if I get a cell phone, I get increased mobility. I can go around, and I don't have, if I go over to my daughter's house, I can still be able to get, these phone calls. And it took her a long time to come around to this thing, but now she's embraced it. Now we're trying to get her to use Zoom. That's another story. But yeah, I think as we're thinking about technology, we can never think about the technology first, because the technology is always in service to a human need. And so understanding what the human needs are is paramount if we want to deal with technology adoption, because we have to understand where people are, where they're coming from, what are the things that they're driving toward, such that we can meet them in the place that they are with the right set of technologies that eases them into an adoption that they can manage, that they don't feel overwhelmed with. And, it's easier said than done, obviously. And I've done this many times with different organizations, but, remembering to put people first is paramount. That's the way that I think it's always that we have to approach these issues.
Definitely, and if I can take the liberty of trying to give an answer myself, just as a non-technical person in the technology industry, if I didn't study CS, I was a science major, but that didn't really inform what I'm doing today so much. But what I really tried to do was supplement, where I felt like I had gaps. So, some of the companies, they did have great education opportunities where the internal teams would train the non-technical people on certain aspects of the technology so we could get a better understanding, whether it was through a demo or just like that same thing you're saying, hands-on learning experience to really get it. But then there's organizations, professionally, and Dennis put a shameless plug for Blacks in Technology, but it's true. That's part of our mission, is to kind of give you exposure to those different training opportunities. And we have partnerships with various organizations to provide certifications and things like that. But there are resources out there to support what you're doing. So if you are looking for something, our organization is one place to start, but there are resources available, especially to Black people in particular. Now that the focus has been in the past year more on our needs, I think this is time to leverage the opportunities that are available and seize the day, and really, if you have an interest in something, to really pursue it. And there are some free opportunities as well. But yeah, sometimes it's not the traditional education anymore. It's maybe getting a cert here or there, or even just watching a video to just familiarize yourself with the jargon. Because a lot of the, when you said PMO earlier, program management office is what I assume you were talking about. But in every company, they may have a variation of an acronym, and you have to learn that. So it's a learning experience. You do have to be curious to get into this field. I think that's the starting point. You have to want to learn and be open to learning different things. But yeah, there's a wealth of resources nowadays. And like you're saying with the internet, I mean, when I was getting up there in age, when I had graduated too, a lot of the resources to network and meet people and to learn about the industry weren't as plentiful as they are now. So I feel like anyone considering making the transition into this industry, it's a great time to really get into it, because there's a lot of resources out there for you.
Well, since we're into shameless plugs, I also sit on the board. I'm the chair for CCI, the College of Computing and Informatics at UNC Charlotte. And, this is something we're talking about all the time. How do we provide continuing education for people who've gone beyond their bachelor's degree, but are looking to stay relevant and stay current? So it's not just a plug for CCI, but really it's a plug for any university that you might be affiliated with, or maybe in your vicinity. They're all thinking about the same issue. And so, going back to your undergraduate university and saying, hey, what do you have in continuing education? Because you already have a relationship there. Going back to organizations that are in your local vicinity. All of these organizations are looking to help people with lifelong learning. We talk about the 60-year career space now, instead of just thinking about careers in very short segments, because lifelong learning is really what we need to be focused on. And I think it's in particular, and I will say it, when I was younger, I didn't necessarily think that the twice as good, half as much thing was real. The older that I get, the more real it starts to become, and the more that I see it. And I think that there is a notion that, Black Americans have to be more prepared in some circumstances just to be able to be seen as equivalent. And I can't fix that. I wish I could, but I can't fix that. But I think if we take to heart that, being prepared and having the certifications and having the educational background helps to propel us going forward, and just owning that and really putting that into our cultural DNA is so important. And I can't emphasize enough how much that learning mindset is important. It's not just important in technology, it's particularly important in technology, but I think it's important in the rate and the pace of change that we see in our society today. You have to be a lifelong learner. You're not finished after your first degree or your last degree. You're still having to work on certifications. You're having to educate yourself on things that may be very narrow and maybe somewhat foreign in terms of your previous experience, but you got to learn about them. And being a lifelong learner is the only way that you can stay apace in such a fast changing environment.
Totally. We don't want to be left behind. We don't want our kids to be left behind. We want them to be right up there and yeah, and feel like they're, again, the opportunities are ready for the taking for them as well, and that they have that access and that ability, just like anyone else, to go for what they want in life. So I am just so thankful for you today. It's been great. We got into some really good discussions about a lot of different things. And I really appreciate your support of what we're trying to do. And yeah, I look forward to continuing to talk to you about different things. I've now formally adopted you as a mentor, so I hope you
Well, it doesn't have to be formal because we're there now. We're there.
okay, cool. And so, yeah, I just, again, on a more serious note, I dedicate this meeting to a fellow UVA alum, Brian Barrett. He, in our junior year of college, started his IT consulting business out of his dorm room. He went on to secure contracts with the city of Charlottesville and state and federal government agencies, and he passed unexpectedly
Mm.
in December. So I dedicate this to him and all the promise he had and how he inspired all of us to pursue our dreams. So thank you again. And it's a wrap for us. And thank you for everyone who attended. This will be recorded and sent to you after the call. So have a great day. Be well. And thank you again.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
Bye. Take care.